Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our show lounge, and this is the lounge where we have, first of all, our presentations like this morning. Our guest lecturers speak here. It's also the room where we have our shows, and also we do some cooking demonstrations and all sorts in here. So you'll join us, hopefully, for many of those throughout the course of the cruise. It's a pleasure today to welcome to our ship. Well, it can only be described as an adventurer in many ways, ladies and gentlemen. He spent much of his life on different boats from all sorts of rivers and seas. He's been everywhere on every kind of vessel, from schooners to kayaks, with some great tales to tell. And he's here to share his very special knowledge of the area that we're going to be sailing through throughout the next few days together. It's a great pleasure to welcome Captain Richard Hayward.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. My pleasure to be aboard this beautiful ship again, and it's so nice to see so many people. And aren't we happy to be out of our home bubble and on this beautiful ship, and wherever we're going, that's where we're going. So, of course, the itinerary has changed a bit, and of course, we have troubles in the world, but we're at this point in life, we're used to them, right? Anyway, my pleasure to be aboard with you. I'm a still active duty merchant marine officer with the U.S. Coast Guard license, and as Alan was saying, I've worked on all kinds of ships, many years in Asia, and as an adventurer, I've done about 5,000 miles at sea in my sailing klepper kayak, if you know that, kind of an adventure expedition vessel from Antarctica to the Amazon to the Yangtze River and around. But after all those adventures, I kind of like being on this ship. I don't know why. Maybe the food is really better than a tin can lifestyle. But anyway, I've been coming up to the Caribbean for many of us as sort of a neighborhood backyard, if that's kind of not a good way to describe it, except that so many North Americans come to the Caribbean on a holiday like this, and so I'm sure many of you have already been to many of these places and have the experience of going to the resorts and the pleasures of the Caribbean. I am going to talk about the destinations, but I'm particularly interested to share some of the Caribbean culture and the life that is living here now after a century of troubles and pirates and slavery and colonialism. Now the Caribbean is actually a fairly healthy and happy place, if not completely so. And of course it has a lot of trouble now being shut down because of COVID. Various islands close up, open up, and above all, there's no particular unity of the nations and islands of the Caribbean. It has been called let me see if this works. Yes, I think it maybe does. It's been called the computer that fell asleep. Oh, well, I should have spilled more coffee on it. Pardon me, just 1 minute. This will work someday. There we are. Yes, it does. But anyway, this has been called the nation of islands, or the continent of islands, because the area is as vast as a continental area of North or South America. But it is this strew of islands, as you well know. We're in the Bahamas now, which is perhaps the most tricky of navigation areas, because if you've looked out at sea just this morning, you can see the palm trees off in the distance, but it could even be a mirage, in the sense that you have all these little spits of sand out there, and this was the graveyard of many a sail vessel when they didn't know quite where they were or what that was, particularly in any bad weather. And so we're going to be going, of course, down to Puerto Rico. We were going to land at Turk and Caicos, but for various reasons that was changed to San Juan, and then down into the Leeward Islands all the way to Barbados, which you can see is on the far right-hand side on what's called the Windward Island, because the trade winds are blowing from the east to the west pretty steadily all through the islands. And in the days of sail, which continue in your private vessels and some tall ships, you have to make a passage according to that tack, that windward passage to Barbados or out to Barbuda, Antigua, where they're considered the Windward Islands. If you're coming from Africa, Canary Islands, Europe, you would traditionally, the sailing instructions would be you go down to the Canary Islands, where the ship was just last month, and traditionally when you would take along a very important navigational instrument, which is a stick of butter. And when the butter melts, that means it's warm enough, the trade winds are such you can go west and come into the Caribbean area. So that's why they keep butter on this ship, just in case all the electronics fail. And then the sailors would often come first to Barbados or up to the Virgin Islands or up into the Bahamas. And of course, Columbus and all the other European adventurers found there was a great deal more islands and more land. I will be talking about just the oceanography and ecology of the Caribbean Sea on another sea day after we're visiting a few islands. Today I'm just going to talk about Puerto Rico, Antigua, and St. Thomas, where we're going. And again, this is a varied place, particularly because, however, the common troubles of the past, the history, all these, half of the islands are independent, and others are still part of either the UK, France, the Netherlands, the United States. And so this means that island by island, they're either speaking a form of Creole, French, English, Spanish, Dutch. And so actually each island has a very sort of distinctive flavor culturally. And of course, this area where we're going, Puerto Rico is a Spanish-speaking island. The Virgin Islands are mostly English-speaking. You get to Saint Martin, that's the French and Dutch island that is separated if you've been there. That actually has the highest ratio of tourists to residents, which is one resident is outmatched by 25 visitors every year. So it's sort of overwhelmed with resorts and big airports and such. And it's also been beaten up badly by a hurricane a couple of years ago. Then you get Montserrat, that's French. Antigua is English-speaking with Barbuda. Guadeloupe is French-speaking, of course, and it's a département of France. And if you've been following the news of the area, they've had riots in Bataire and Guadeloupe over the COVID restrictions, which are the standard for France. And so here they're in a tropical island having to behave just like the Parisians. You can't go outside without a certificate or whatever it is. And so they have had riots fighting in the streets of Guadeloupe over the restrictions. And of course, the other islands that may be French-speaking but are independent don't have those restrictions. They are independent, so they can not have to follow, let's say, the international code. So you have the other islands like Dominica, St. Lucia, going down to St. Vincent's. Those are all independent nations from their heritage. And so each one has their own different health codes these days. Well, I'll leave that behind. We'll see how it is as we go there. But just for the cultural heritage of the Caribbean, there were indigenous peoples here, the Arawak, the Taino, and the Carib people for various islands. And they did have trade and communication between each other around all the way to the trading with the Maya in Yucatan, Cuba, then down to these islands, all the way down to the Trinidad and Tobago, and then the South American coast. The Caribe name is actually the group that emigrated by canoes up through these Leeward Islands in about 1,000 years ago, pre-European contact, and they battled with the Arawak and the Taino. But there was only an estimate of maybe 100,000 people on all of these islands at that time. It's hard to tell. But they've found these kind of ceremonial circle stones. This is in Puerto Rico. And there's been more appreciation via DNA analysis of how many people in these islands have some of the blood of the Caribe or the Taino, and a kind of a reappreciation of their culture. This is a colonial era drawing with, let's say, a tropical fig leaf for the Caribe woman, but you can see that in various places they've been recreating the villages. This is again in Puerto Rico, where the word, they will call themselves Borican. That's the Taino name for their nation prior to the conquistadores coming. And so they've built that, and of course they're wearing fig leaves right there, you can see that. But Puerto Rico is a great island. If you have been there, many people go for a holiday, but it's both the tropical resort island, but it also has a lot of industry, a lot of different parts of it. Have a central cordillera, mountains in the middle. We're going to San Juan, the great harbor on the north. Vieques is the island that was formerly U.S. Navy reserve, which is now a ecological reserve. Culebra Island is famous for its luminescent plankton, where you can go swimming in that. I think there's an excursion there. There's also the great Yungas tropical forest, the only national park of the United States that is a full tropical rainforest, and there's an excursion from the ship to there. It's maybe an hour or so out of central San Juan. And then you have all the other towns along the coast, Ponce, Mayaguez, and all the other places. So the center of the island is very rugged with forests, and a lot of it's had to be restored because most of the timber was cut. That created a lot of, let's say, alluvial plains flooding, and the island of Puerto Rico has also had so much of a population explosion that many places are very crowded, what good agricultural land there is. Therefore, Puerto Rico, like many other Caribbean islands, has been exporting people. And I live in New York State, where many Puerto Ricans and also Dominicanos live there. So this is sort of part of our local culture. If you've ever seen the movie In the Heights or the musical, and the kind of appreciation of the island tropical lifestyle that has been put into Miami and New York and major cities, it's part of the general culture now. And so Puerto Rico is, let's say, always in the news because it's either has a hurricane, demonstrations for independence, another referendum. It is a commonwealth of the United States. That's the San Juan flag on the lower right side. And the Puerto Rican flag has, similar to the Cuban flag, it was designed with red, white, and blue back in the 1860s as an independence flag versus the Spanish. So it was actually a rebel flag originally, with the hope that Puerto Rico, but especially Cuba, would be liberated from the Spanish and then join the United States. But in the 1880s, there was a law said these two territories, if they ever got free from the Spanish, would not be allowed to join the United States because they were Spanish-speaking and Catholic, and they would upset the balance between the North and the South, and they also had slavery at that time. So that's post-U.S. Civil War. So this is a sort of complication of Puerto Rico in particular. I don't know if we have any friends from there on the ship, but they're very proud of their island and somewhat at various points of dis-ease legally and economically being a part of the United States. But here's our entrance to San Juan Harbor, the great El Morro, this tremendous Spanish castle, which is similar to the one that was built at the entrance to Havana to protect the island capital from pirates and from other fleets and navies to come in. So this is one of the biggest forts in all of the Americas. And by the way, it was built by slave labor. Native and African slaves built that fort under the Spanish rule. And it's still in very good condition for a fort. It's pretty solid even if it gets a little weather now and then. And it overlooks the whole harbor. So we'll be docking at that terminal right there if they make room for it. We'll have to send off a cannon to get the other ship out of the way, though. And here's one of the last guards of the Spanish Empire. Hasn't gotten the news that Puerto Rico is not reporting to Spain anymore. And here's the view from the fort of the national capital. And you can see the Resort de Conado down the coast there where most of the hotels are. Right in this area, though, is the old town, the Ciudad Vieja, which is part of the Organa tour. If you haven't been to that part of San Juan, it's actually very historic and very interesting and pedestrian friendly. You can walk from the ship into this area. Again, the capital with both flags. We'll be docking right here at the Coast Guard station across from this was the center for the Spanish Navy originally, and that chapel is one of the oldest buildings in Puerto Rico as a Catholic chapel for the Navy. And these are the headquarters that were built by the Spanish and then assumed by the U.S. Navy in 1898. And so you can very much feel the Spanish culture here, like in many other parts of the Americas, of course. But they've been restored and respected as buildings, particularly with all this other new construction all over down the other parts of the city. When I was there last, they had the great ship of the Spanish Main that was reconstructed and was sailing as a Hispanic heritage tour all through the Latin America. So this happened to be pulled up at the dock here. So that's the kind of ship that we would have been on a cruise back a couple of hundred years ago. But again, the food was not quite up to Silver Sea standards, but you got more exercise, you know, pulling up the sails and all that. And this is just on the walkway from the ship terminal around the old town. That's actually a statue of Infant Principe, the Henry the Navigator of Portugal, who led the navigation school that opened up the world to sailors, let's say. And then, of course, our favorite controversial Columbus, who has this statue there right on the old town. I think it's still there. They may have moved it to another place by now, and the troubles of Columbus. I'll give a talk just about him on the way back to Fort Lauderdale. And we still don't know where he was born, where he's buried, or if he's perhaps still out at sea looking for another continent. We don't know. Anyway, in Puerto Rico, you have this, let's say, palpable sense of conquest, redemption, above all, religion. This is a rather stern-looking priest statue overlooking the sea, and then others that are more civic and perhaps a little happier. I mean, the Puerto Rican nation is, by its own sense, a pretty happy group. They may have troubles and tragedies, but they never miss a chance to be friendly or play music or dance. And so this is the central square in the old town, which is, they have a gazebo and bands playing there all the time. And again, you can walk from the ship up to that area and see what's going on. It's probably all decorated for Christmas now. And this is the motto of Puerto Rico, the tourist trap, because you have lots of shops, lots of hotels, lots, things for sale. And of course, most of the resorts are out on the beaches and all around the island. There's lots of other places. This is just the old town of San Juan. And it was somewhat abandoned for many decades, but now they've made it a UNESCO heritage site, and they're rebuilding some of the buildings and renewing them into coffee shops. That's the wave of the future still. And Puerto Rico kind of, when you go there, particularly if we're there at night, the whole town sort of, I would say, is dancing. You can hear the reggaeton beat is taken over. And I was once there a couple of years ago, and that beat didn't stop till the sun was well up, and all of the partygoers had finally decided it's too sunny to dance anymore. I mean, I don't have music clips here or video but you can hear it when we go there. In this particular case, right here in the central square of San Juan, this guy was dancing with his, I think it's a pet iguana, or maybe just a friend. So this is the animated life of Puerto Rico. Now down the strip, you get all these. It's like going in an architectural tour. You get Art Deco hotels, and then you get giant new big glass boxes, and some of them have been abandoned in recent times. I don't know how much of it is open now, but this would take a seasonal flood of people, and now they're coming back slowly. One of the things you can see there, you can go to the Bacardi rum distillery. That's just outside of San Juan itself. Maybe it's on the tours still if it's open, but this was a family that was based in Cuba, and they came after Castro appropriated their businesses. They came and set up the same thing in Puerto Rico, and so that's sort of the trademark rum of the island. I have some friends who live up in the mountains near Yungue, the national park, and this is a forestry project, just to give you contrast from the city life. La Casas de la Selva, the houses in the jungle. They, as part of a group called Ecotechnics, which is a research charity based in the UK and has study places around the world, and this is their tropical forest research, where they took a mountainside that had been deforested, eroded, and then was becoming a desert, of which there are some in Puerto Rico because of deforestation up in the high mountains. They just couldn't get, the soil was gone and the tropical heat would beat, and so they carefully replanted the indigenous species and have now set up research stations for other forestry research, and also they run lumber mill because they have regrown mahogany and other hardwoods that were valuable in this forest. It has grown from a bare hillside to this almost impenetrable jungle, and they continue to plant, and then they have now providing fresh, clear water for the towns below. From this site, you can actually see the ocean. So you're up at about 2,000 feet, maybe over 900 meters or so up, and they have begun to plant specific trees, and then they harvest it. And the government of Puerto Rico was very interested in this because they have about 3 million people on the island. After every hurricane, they have trees falling down. And so this is the only group that has a mobile sawmill to go and cut up all these beautiful old trees and then provide it to the local lumber market, because they were finding every time they had a hurricane damage, they'd have to bring a ship with 2x4s and construction material from Florida that came from Canada or the Pacific Northwest. So now they are providing lumber there for the people of Puerto Rico, including some endangered species have been restored. And then with that comes all of the bird life and the other lush life of the tropics. When that Hurricane Maria went through the other year, about 3 years ago, took off every tree off of every leaf off of every tree, and they were suddenly barren. But these tropical trees have the ability, they've grown, at least the indigenous ones, so that they can be stripped of their trees from a hurricane, but they will still rebloom. So now if we go there all of day after tomorrow, you probably see it in this condition again. And so that's the natural beauty of Puerto Rico that's quite available close from the dock in San Juan. Well, we'll go on to the Virgin Islands, of which there are the U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and these were part of originally the Danish Empire, and they were sold to the United States back in 1912 as a trade of islands. Of course, they were part of the, let's say, the sugar industry, plantations. Originally had slaves. Now they are mostly tourist islands, and the British Virgin Islands are to the north. We are going to St. Thomas, which is the largest and most developed of the Virgin Islands of the U.S. Territory. We'll be going into Charlotte Amalie, again named after the Dutch queen. And then there are all these different islands and beaches, and so typically you go right over to whichever bay you want to go, Megan's Bay, Perseverance, Santa Maria. And it's a rugged island in the middle, but it's well developed, and so there's villages and towns. And then it has a dense, small old town, which has been a famous port for many years just because it's so secure. That's a very snug harborage, even in a hurricane. And so for 100 more years, there have been ships coming down here to go visit the beautiful islands. And of course, if you have your private sailboat, that's the yachtsman's paradise. Just go from one to the other. You always see the next one every day. And if the weather's good, there's no better sailing because you have steady winds and such. So we'll be there at the terminal to the left of that big ship. Hopefully the giant ships are not coming anymore. That's just my opinion, though. And this has been famously an overcrowded port with too many people on it. Many smaller vessels or better ones have a more interesting itinerary that don't go there. I think it's just yawning for company right now. And up in the hills, you have different sites. This is the famous castle they call Blackbeard's Castle. Whether he actually defended it or not, that's the overlook to the whole harbor. And again, this became a United States territory, but it had its own bank and it has its own local commerce and local administration. It is like Puerto Rico, not a state, but a commonwealth and a territory. So they have benefits of being part of the United States, but they don't vote in elections and such restrictions. So it's lush. It doesn't have much forest left, just a few. This is the African flame tree, it's called, which is always in bloom. This is Megan's Beach, which is on the north side of the island. So you can see it's sort of spread out in a lot of different facilities, and people have homes there. I mean, this is a place where you can just go buy yourself a nice vacation home and then enjoy the little towns and the shopping and the transit around in little jitneys. So it's sort of, I would call, a fun island if you want to have fun. And it has a nightlife and such. Not quite as loud as San Juan, though. And then I'll show you a little bit of Antigua and Barbuda, which are, again, formerly British territory, now an independent nation, with this particularly distinctive flag. I'm not sure if that's the sun coming up or going down, but then again, I'm not from around here. Here it is with a few different islands, but again, a very small population, about 300,000 in all of it. And so it became independent and is proud of it. Mostly, though, the economy is tourism, because this particular area of Antigua has so many little islands and little bays. It's said to have a beach for every day of the year and many secluded spots. So this, again, is a place where many sailors go and then vacationers. You can see all of the scallop bays, and we're going into St. John, which is up in the northwest corner in the lee of the trade wind. So again, all of these islands, you will, if you face on the east side, you're facing the trade winds and often big surf coming from the open Atlantic, and then the leeward side is the calm Caribbean, where most of the harbors and the development are. Well, anyway, this is the seal of Antigua, each endeavoring, all achieving, which is perhaps is a bit of wishful thinking when it's so sunny and nice. Why do you have to work that much? But let me go back. Where did they get the stag and the deer, much less that medieval armor helmet? Now, who wants to wear that in the tropics? Maybe some gendarme or rather some police. Now, this is the official ceremonies that when you may have seen on the TV. Barbados just had one, but we'll get to that another day. But Antigua, like these other small islands that are now independent, they have tried to make a cohesive society out of some disparate parts. The remainders of the plantation economy, the former slaves that are now educated and running their own affairs, and so and then trying to have a position in the global economy beyond just tourism. But it's difficult because these islands are fairly resource poor. Some of them have some fishing left, but not even much of that. So this is what has happened to St. John's and Antigua, and many places we go. A giant cruise terminal and a port is centered around the flow of visitors like ourselves. So again, we will be docked right here. You can walk right off into, there's some newer buildings. That's the cathedral on the rise over there. And the old fish markets and some of the street markets are still there. So this is, again, a pretty much of a small walking town. Most of the business is done in the morning because by midday it's pretty hot. But you're not far from the ship. Some ships are a bit more of a hike than others, but you can see that building up here, that big one up there. That's the hospital that was donated to the island by the financier Sanford, who was famous for his online gambling, and then he ended up in such trouble. Anybody know him? He got a sentence for 110 years for his financial fraud, but he's on his estate in Antigua on the beach, so that's his punishment, is to retire to the island that he patronized. And you can go off on excursions. There are a couple of sailboat excursions off the ship this trip, and so as a sailor, that's what I always do, as long as they don't beat me. And or you could just walk around the town. I like some of the little old houses, of which there's some left. Now that's really high-end shopping if you ever saw it. Reasonable. That's the new fashion statement. How reasonable. Anyway, here's a view of, again, St. John and the cathedral, which was built in the late 1700s, then an earthquake demolished it, so now it's very heavily stone built. It's an Anglican church, but it has French interior because the English at the time took some, let's say, war booty from a French cathedral and moved it in there. So that's decorated by Napoleon himself. But you can go up there, it's open to the public. It's sort of in let's say, weathered by the tropical climate, as are other sites around the island. There's still sugarcane mills. Most of the fields have gone fallow because the only use for sugarcane these days commercially is to make rum, and you don't need that much. On the other side of the Antigua is the small town of Falmouth, which has, of course, named after the town in Cornwall, but similarly it has a totally safe, snug harbor. And this is in the middle of it. You can see all the yachts in there. That's probably the snuggest place to put your vessel in the whole Caribbean, just because it's almost like an inland lake. And this was identified by the Royal Navy as such a good place for working on ships that it became the Navy base that Lord Nelson was assigned to as a young captain. And so he did many years here in the dockyards here, which have been rebuilt and now opened as a historic feature of visiting Antigua. Again, there's a tour there. So this was sort of left abandoned by the Navy, but now a group of Antiguans have renovated it and now made it into a historic site with shops and museum. And it's right next to all of the docks, though. So if you're in your private boat, you could just sail right up there and have the features of the modern marina in this historic site. So here's the graving docks and some of the relics of the old Navy times. I don't know why they don't have that on our ship. I could put it up at the gym, right, to raise the anchor. Though we don't ever use anchors much anymore. Some new ships are being built without them because they trust that thing in the sky. Anyway, but here you go, all these beautiful boats. So, of course, they don't fit them out properly with cannon anymore, except for the races. But we'll see that some people have come down to these islands because they can't go anywhere else, so they get a vessel, their own, or they charter one. But then they found out that they can't go to the next island. And so many private sailors have been sort of kept to their vessel. They're not even, last year, they were not even allowed to go in and get supplies. They had to have them delivered. So they thought they were getting away from all the world's trouble, and they just ended up, let's say, living on a boat. Well, it could be worse. And, a lot of the local people sort of wonder what's next, let's say. And, they're, again, very welcoming and proud of their heritage, however painful it is. Even though the history has been tragic in many ways, at least life is better now, and what they say now, they have freedom, respect, and some prosperity. And for many years, they've been trying to make more of a union of the Caribbean islands. This is the Caribbean Development Bank. And they thought that if they could have a common bank and a political representation, then they would have more effect in world affairs. The problem is they could never decide where the capital would be. Would it be Jamaica? Would it be Barbados? Would it be Puerto Rico? And then again, they speak all kinds of different languages, so there was never much unity. Of course, what often unifies people that don't speak a language in common is sports. So football, cricket, all these things are very much of a Caribbean broad competition. And also they've emphasized a lot of education. So they have the University of the Caribbean is partly in Jamaica, partly in Barbados, and other islands host branches of various levels of study. And then you also have common religions. Now this is a man who is representing, I'm not sure what, maybe the animist, the early indigenous religion in contrast to the other ones that have come in, like voodoo and in Haiti and other African religion practices, and then all of the Christianity in its many different varieties, Catholic, evangelical, Protestant. So everywhere you go, you're going to see very tremendous churches above all, even the cathedral in St. John there. This was French style. And so part of the culture of the Caribbean is extreme religiosity, I'd call it. Now that and let's say music. And so particularly if you're anywhere on a Sunday, you'll see everybody dressed up and going to either the big cathedral or, let's say, an evangelical new church. This one is in Dominica. And so this sort of, let's say, religious passion is particularly strong all through the Caribbean. I'm not sure, there's an old saying is that the sun keeps us smiling, the rain keeps us multiplying, and may the Lord save us from all of the above. And so you can go, this is in St. Martin, a mixed church of evangelical kind, and then even this is in St. John, a picture I took of mottos on the street: be firm, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong, while you're waiting for the bus. And here's another one: but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. That's Martin Luther King. And so you do have this passionate sense in the people, and most expressed in the music, and we can have a variety of it, but I'm going to leave you with a couple of just Caribbean sayings of, here's one: the donkey says the world is not level. Do not curse the alligator before you cross the stream. Yeah, yes, well. And the devil is always busy in high winds. Better to love people and use things than to love things and use people. Well, and I'll tell you one little story, which is there's a work crew on a road in one of the islands, and one man digs a hole, and then he sits down, and then the other man comes after 10 minutes and fills the hole up. And then he goes down another pace, and they do it again. And so some visitor's saying what are you guys doing? You're digging a hole and you're filling it up. And they look at him and say, we got government jobs. Just because the guy with the trees didn't show up doesn't mean we don't work. Anyway, I have more like that, but right now I just will leave with a little music for you. And this is actually, I won't torture you with my karaoke, but this is Hey Man, No Problem, moving to the rhythm, wailing with the funky beat, dancing through the night, chilling through the days, soaking up the rays, jamming my life away. No cares, man, 'cause that's the Caribbean way. Well, welcome to the Caribbean, and I look forward to meeting you. Thank you. Thank you.
Give me just a little smile. That's all I